The station was built to impress beings who measured power in distance and silence. Its corridors stretched in long, gleaming lines that seemed to vanish into polished light, every surface reflecting authority, every system calibrated to perfection. Nothing here was meant to fail, which was precisely why, when it did so with remarkable enthusiasm. Queen Dara felt the shift before the alarms began, a subtle distortion in the gravity field, a fraction too heavy, then suddenly too light, like the station itself had second thoughts about existing. Her long ears tilted slightly, catching the faint harmonic disruption beneath the ambient hum. Around her, diplomats continued speaking in carefully translated tones, unaware that the room had already begun to betray them. Then the alarms came. Not one unified warning, but a cascade of overlapping alerts, each system apparently convinced it was the most important voice in the room. Lights dimmed, flared, and dimmed again. A translation drone sputtered mid-sentence and announced with great confidence that all guests are now classified as decorative furniture. Dara did not move immediately. Queens did not react. They assessed. Her guards, however, reacted enough for everyone. Weapons raised, formation tightening, they created a living wall around her. Their armor shimmered with defensive energy, turning the already tense chamber into something sharper, more dangerous. Across the room, representatives of 3 different species attempted to look dignified while quietly stepping away from one another. Containment failure in outer sectors, one of her attendants reported, voice steady despite the chaos. Evacuation protocols are... The floor shifted again, more violently this time. A ripple passed through the chamber, throwing several delegates off balance. Dara remained upright, though only because she adjusted faster than the movement itself. Her gaze lifted slightly, calculating. This was not a contained failure. This was collapse. "Your Majesty," another voice cut in, different, unrefined, and entirely unimpressed by royal timing. "We need to move. Now." Dara turned. The speaker was human. That alone explained part of the tone. He stood at the edge of her guard formation, already stepping into a space he had not been invited into. His armor was functional rather than ceremonial, scratched in places where no one had bothered to repair it for appearance's sake. His expression suggested that, whatever was happening, it was inconvenient more than alarming. "I have a route," he added, gesturing toward a side corridor that had not been part of any official plan, or what used to be a route, before this place decided to become a cautionary tale. One of Dara's guards shifted, clearly preparing to object. Dara raised a hand, silencing him without looking. "You are assigned to this station?" she asked, her voice calm, controlled, carrying the weight of expectation. The human shrugged slightly. "Assigned, attached, occasionally ignored. Depends on the day." He glanced at the ceiling as another alarm cut through the air. Today feels like an ignored day that's about to get worse. There was a pause, a brief, fragile moment where protocol and survival considered negotiating. Dara stepped forward. Her guards hesitated, then moved with her, though their formation loosened as the corridor narrowed. The grandeur of the diplomatic chamber gave way to something far less impressive. Exposed panels, maintenance conduits, the faint smell of overheated systems. It was not a space designed for queens. The human moved ahead, not leading in any formal sense, but navigating with the ease of someone who had already accepted the station's flaws long before it admitted them. He tapped a control panel as they passed, muttering something under his breath. "What did you say?" Dara asked. "Nothing important," he replied. "Just telling the system I always believed in it. Sometimes that helps." The panel sparked in response. "See?" he added. "Positive reinforcement." Behind them, a distant impact reverberated through the structure, a low, unsettling sound that lingered longer than it should have. Dara felt it in the bones of the station, and in something quieter within herself. "This was meant to be a place of unity," she said, more to the space than to him. "Yeah," the human said, glancing back briefly. "Turns out unity doesn't always come with structural integrity." Another turn, another flicker of unstable light. The corridor dipped slightly, gravity shifting just enough to remind them that the station was losing its argument with physics. Dara studied him as they moved. His pace was steady, his attention divided between the path ahead and the failing systems around them. There was no visible tension in him, no performance of urgency, only action. "You do not seem concerned," she observed. He considered that for a moment. "I am concerned," he said, "just not surprised." "And that difference is acceptable to you?" "It's practical," he replied. "Surprise wastes time." A sudden jolt ran through the corridor, sharper than the others. The lights flickered again, then stabilized into a dim, uneven glow. For a moment, everything was very still. The human stopped. Dara's guards tightened instinctively, weapons raised once more. Dara herself remained composed, though her ears angled slightly forward, listening. "What is it?" she asked. He looked ahead, then down at a small handheld scanner he had pulled from his belt. The device emitted a soft, irregular pulse. "Well," he said, his tone almost conversational, "good news is, the corridor's still here. And the bad news?" He gave a small, crooked smile. "It's thinking about leaving." The corridor did not collapse immediately, which somehow made it worse. It groaned instead. A long, metallic complaint that traveled through the walls like a living thing, deciding whether it was worth continuing. The floor beneath them flexed, not enough to break, but enough to remind everyone present that it absolutely could. "Encouraging," the human said, glancing at his scanner again. "It's hesitating. That's good." Dara's gaze did not leave the narrowing stretch ahead. "You consider indecision in structural integrity favorable compared to commitment," he replied. "Absolutely." Another low vibration passed through the corridor. One of the overhead panels snapped loose and clattered to the ground behind them, skidding across the metal surface before coming to a stop against the wall. No one turned to look at it. Dara stepped forward. Her guards followed, though their formation had degraded into something tighter, more reactive. This was not a place for ceremony anymore. It was a place for movement. The human adjusted something on his wrist, then moved again. Slower now, each step measured against the subtle shifts beneath their feet. Dara matched his pace without being told to. "You know this station well," she said. "Well enough to know it lies about being stable," he answered. "That helps." The corridor dipped slightly. Gravity shifted, not enough to disorient, but enough to pull at balance. Dara compensated instantly, her posture adjusting with precise control. One of her guards stumbled half a step before recovering. The human noticed. "Don't fight it," he said. "Let it move you a little. It's like walking on a ship." "This is not a ship," Dara replied. "No," he said. "Ships are usually better behaved." There was a flicker of something in her expression. Not quite amusement, not quite irritation. It passed quickly. They reached a junction where the corridor split into two narrower passages, both equally uninviting. One was dimly lit, the other almost completely dark. The human paused, studying both, then glanced at his scanner again. "Left is shorter," he muttered. "Right is less actively falling apart." Dara stepped closer, her presence altering the space simply by existing within it. "Which do you choose?" He looked at her, then back at the corridors. "Depends. Do you prefer quick risks or slow problems?" "I prefer outcomes that ensure survival." "Ah," he said. "That would be the slow problems then." He turned toward the darker corridor. Dara followed without hesitation. The darkness inside was not complete, but it was enough to swallow detail. Emergency strips along the floor flickered weakly, casting uneven lines of light that shifted as the power fluctuated. The air felt cooler here, thinner somehow, as if the station had already begun to forget this section. The human reached up and tapped a small control on his helmet. A soft glow activated along its edges, illuminating just enough to reveal the path ahead. "You travel with built-in light," Dara observed. "Helps when the universe forgets to pay its electricity bill," he said. Behind them, one of Dara's guards activated a similar function, though far more refined, casting a cleaner, steadier beam. The contrast between the two lights, one practical, one precise, stretched across the corridor in overlapping patterns. They moved deeper. The silence here was different. The alarms were distant now, muted by layers of metal and failing systems. In their place was a quieter sound, the subtle ticking and shifting of structures under stress, the faint whisper of air moving where it should not. Dara's attention shifted again, drawn not just to the environment, but to the human ahead of her. He moved without wasted motion. Not elegantly, not ceremonially, but efficiently. His body adjusted constantly. Small shifts in weight, slight turns of the shoulders, compensating for irregularities before they became problems. It was not performance. It was habit. Your movement, she said suddenly. It is adaptive. He glanced back briefly. That's one word for it. You adjust before instability manifests fully. Experience, he replied. Things usually give you a warning before they fail. You just have to listen. Dara's gaze lowered briefly to the way his steps fell. Then the light shifted, not from their equipment, but from ahead. A sudden flicker, sharper than the others, illuminating the corridor in a brief, stark flash. For a fraction of a second, everything was clear. And in that moment, Dara saw it. The human had removed part of his outer plating. Not completely, just enough to access something beneath, some internal mechanism he was adjusting as they walked. But the gap it created revealed more than machinery. Skin, marked. Not in the way her people displayed their scars. Clean, deliberate, enhanced. These were different, irregular, layered. Some old, faded into pale lines. Others newer, darker, crossing over older marks without regard for pattern or meaning. A history without presentation. The light flickered again, then dimmed. But the image remained. Dara slowed, just slightly. You are damaged, she said. The human stopped. Not abruptly, not alarmed. Just enough to turn toward her, following the direction of her gaze. He looked down at himself, then back up. Oh, he said. That. There was a brief pause as if he were considering how to respond. I've been called worse, he added. One of Dara's guards shifted, uncertain whether this was humor or deflection. Dara did not look away. These are not ceremonial markings, she said. They are untreated. Some of them were treated, he replied, just not artistically. Another flicker of light passed through the corridor, softer this time. Dara stepped closer, her long ears angled forward, focusing entirely on what she saw. There was no revulsion in her expression, no immediate judgment, only analysis, and something else, quieter. You carry them openly, she said. The human followed her gaze again, then shrugged. I carry them because they're attached, he said. Taking them off seemed complicated. Silence. Then unexpectedly, one of Dara's guards made a small sound, something dangerously close to a suppressed laugh. The human noticed. Careful, he said lightly. If you start laughing, the corridor might take it personally. As if in response, the structure around them creaked again, louder this time. The moment broke. The human adjusted his armor back into place, sealing the gap with a practiced motion. We should keep moving, he said. I'd like to get out before this place decides it's had enough of us. Dora did not move immediately. Her gaze lingered a fraction longer, as if committing the image to memory. Then she stepped forward and followed. The corridor narrowed further, as if the station itself were reconsidering how much space they deserved. Metal ribs curved inward along the walls, exposed and uneven, forcing Dara's guards to move in a staggered line rather than formation. The air carried a faint electrical taste now, sharp on the tongue, mixed with something older, burnt insulation perhaps, or systems that had given up quietly before anyone noticed. The human slowed again, raising his scanner slightly. The device pulsed with a soft, uneven rhythm, as though it too was unsure of its conclusions. Still thinking? Dara asked. Still arguing, he replied. The station's systems don't agree on what's broken. That usually means everything. He stepped over a loose conduit, gesturing back without looking. Dara followed, her movements precise even in the constrained space. One of her guards misjudged the step and caught his boot on the edge, stumbling forward. The human reached out automatically, steadying him before the fall completed. Easy, he said. Gravity's already having a rough day. No need to help it. The guard stiffened, clearly uncertain how to respond to being assisted by someone outside the hierarchy. Dara noticed, but said nothing. They moved on. The silence between them shifted, no longer empty but filled with something forming. Dara's attention returned inevitably to the memory of what she had seen. The scars had not been arranged, not preserved. They had simply existed. You said they are. What happened? She said at last. The human glanced back briefly. That sounds like something I'd say. It is insufficient, she continued. Events of that magnitude demand recognition. They must be acknowledged. By who? He asked. By the one who endured them, she answered without hesitation. He considered that as he adjusted a panel along the wall, forcing it closed with a short burst of mechanical strength. I did acknowledge them, he said. At the time. That is not the same, Dara replied. It worked well enough, he said lightly. I'm still here. A faint crack echoed somewhere deeper in the station, followed by a distant rush of displaced air. The corridor trembled again, more subtly this time, like a warning that had grown tired of repeating itself. Dara stepped closer, her gaze sharpening. You do not display them, she said. You do not speak of them. You do not preserve their meaning. The human tilted his head slightly. I remember them, he said. Isn't that enough? No, she said, the word carrying more weight than the space could hold. Memory fades. Meaning must be reinforced. He stopped walking. The movement was small, but it shifted the entire rhythm of the corridor. Dara halted as well, her guards adjusting around them. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he turned fully this time, meeting her gaze without hesitation. You make it sound like they're supposed to stay important, he said. They are important, Dara replied. He nodded slowly. They were, he said. At the time. That is not how significance functions, she said, her voice tightening slightly. What you have endured defines. It happened, he interrupted, not sharply but firmly enough to stop the rest of her words. That's all. The silence that followed was different from the others. Dara's long ears angled forward, her posture still, controlled, but something beneath it had shifted. Not anger, not yet. Something closer to resistance. You dismiss them, she said. I moved past them, he corrected. There is a difference, she said, not from where I'm standing. A faint flicker of light passed through the corridor, briefly illuminating the edges of his armor. For an instant, the seams where it had been opened earlier were visible again. Small, functional imperfections in something that was never meant to be perfect. Dara's gaze followed those lines. You carry no record, she said quietly. He gave a small, almost amused exhale. I carry all of it, he said. I just don't put it on display. Why? The question came faster than she intended. He blinked once, as if the answer had never needed to be considered before. Because I don't need to, he said. Another tremor passed through the corridor, sharper this time. The lights flickered, then dimmed further, forcing their equipment to compensate. One of Dara's guards shifted uneasily. Your Majesty, we should continue. She did not respond immediately. Her attention remained fixed on the human, as though she were examining a structure that refused to align with any known design. You have endured damage that would define other, she said, and yet you proceed as if it does not. He shrugged slightly. If I stopped every time something hurt, I wouldn't get very far. That is not what I'm describing. Then what are you describing? Dara hesitated. It was a small pause, almost imperceptible, but for her it was significant. Words, usually precise and immediate, failed to assemble themselves into something sufficient. I am describing, she began, then stopped. The human waited. She exhaled slowly. I am describing a lack of acknowledgement, she finished. He studied her for a moment, then nodded once. Maybe, he said, or maybe I just don't need it the same way. Before she could respond, the corridor gave a sudden, violent lurch. The floor tilted sharply to one side, gravity shifting with it. Dara adjusted instantly, her body compensating with practiced control. One of her guards slammed into the wall, catching himself with a burst of energy from his armor. The human braced, one hand against the nearest surface, his other hand already reaching for Dara's arm without hesitation. Careful, he said. This part gets unpredictable. The tilt stabilized, though the angle remained slightly off. Dara did not pull away from his grip immediately. Instead, she looked at him. Really looked this time, not as a subject, not as a curiosity, but as something she did not yet understand. You do not need acknowledgement, she said slowly. He shook his head. Not really. Then what do you need? He released her arm, straightening as the corridor settled. For things to stop breaking would be nice, he said. That's usually my first priority. A faint, unexpected sound escaped one of her guards again. Another suppressed laugh. The human glanced at him. I'm serious, he added. It's a very reasonable goal. Dara's gaze lingered a moment longer. Then, without another word, she stepped forward. And this time, when she moved, there was something different in it. Not hesitation, not certainty, but the beginning of something that had not yet found its name. The corridor eventually ended, though not in any way that suggested intention. It simply stopped. Ahead of them, the passage opened into a fractured junction where three structural segments met at angles that no longer agreed with each other. One wall had partially collapsed inward, exposing layers of internal framework that glowed faintly with residual energy. Another section had shifted just enough to create a narrow gap, barely wide enough for a single person to pass through if they were willing to trust that it would remain that way. The human stepped forward, scanning the space with quiet concentration. Well, he said after a moment, good news is, this wasn't designed like this. Dara's gaze moved across the broken geometry, her expression unreadable. And the bad news? He tilted his head slightly. It wasn't designed like this. One of her guards exhaled slowly. Stability readings? Optimistic, the human replied, which means they're lying. He crouched near the narrow gap, adjusting his scanner again. The device emitted a series of uneven pulses, then settled into a softer rhythm. This section's holding, he said, relatively speaking. Define relatively, Dara said. He glanced up at her. It hasn't collapsed yet. That is not a definition. It's the one we've got. The faint hum of the station shifted again. Lower now, as if something large and distant had begun to move, or fail. Dara stepped closer to the gap. It was unrefined, jagged at the edges where metal had bent rather than broken cleanly. Beyond it, another corridor stretched out, darker but more stable, its structure less distorted. You expect us to pass through this? She said. I expect me to pass through it first, he corrected. Then I'll tell you if it's a bad idea. Without waiting for further discussion, he angled himself sideways and began to move through the gap. His armor scraped lightly against the edges, producing a sound that made one of the guards tense visibly. Halfway through, he paused. Try not to breathe too dramatically, he said. I think it can hear us. There was a brief silence. Then, despite the situation, one of the guards let out a short, involuntary laugh. Dara did not react outwardly, but her ears shifted slightly, catching the tone of it. The human emerged on the other side, straightening and glancing back. See? He said. Still here. He gestured toward the opening. Your turn. Dara studied the gap for a moment longer. This was not how movement was meant to occur. There was no space for posture, no room for presence. It was constricted, unceremonious, unworthy of a queen. She stepped forward anyway. Her movement was controlled, deliberate. She turned slightly, aligning herself with the narrowest angle, and passed through without hesitation. The edges came close, closer than anything had in years, but did not touch her. On the other side, she straightened immediately, her posture restoring itself as if nothing had happened. The human nodded once. Not bad, he said. I was not aware this required evaluation, she replied. It doesn't, he said, but I give it anyway. Her guards followed one by one, less gracefully but successfully. The last of them cleared the gap, just as a faint crack echoed behind them, sharp and final. The human glanced back. That's our cue to keep moving. They did. The new corridor was different, still damaged, still unstable, but less chaotic. The walls here held their shape, the floor level enough to allow a normal pace. The lighting remained dim, but consistent. For a few moments, there was only the sound of their movement. Then Dara spoke. In my people's history, she said, wounds are not left to fade. The human did not slow, but his attention shifted. No, they are marked, she continued, preserved, enhanced if necessary. Each one is a declaration, a record of survival that cannot be ignored. He nodded slightly. Sounds thorough. It is necessary, she said. Without such recognition, the meaning is lost. He adjusted a small panel along the wall as they passed. tapping it twice until it stopped sparking. Or maybe the meaning changes, he said. It does not change, Dara replied. It is fixed. He gave a small, thoughtful hum. That's where we're different then. She looked at him. Explain. He shrugged. For us, things matter when they happen. Maybe for a while after. But eventually, he gestured vaguely behind them. They become part of the past, not something you carry around all the time. That is inefficient, she said. He smiled faintly. Carrying everything forever sounds more inefficient to me. Dara's gaze sharpened. It is not everything. It is what defines you. He stopped. Again, it was a small movement, but it shifted the space around them. He turned slightly, not fully facing her, but enough that his words would not be mistaken. I'm not defined by what happened to me, he said. I'm defined by what I do next. The corridor hummed softly as if acknowledging the statement. Dara considered this. You separate the two, she said. I try to, he replied. Doesn't always work, but it helps. How? He thought about it for a moment, then gave a small, almost reluctant smile. Less to carry. A faint vibration passed through the floor, but it was distant, no longer immediate. Dara looked ahead, then back at him. And if the past demands to be remembered? She asked. He shrugged. It usually does, he said. But remembering doesn't mean you have to live in it. There was a pause. Then unexpectedly he added, Besides, if I gave every scar a speech, I'd never get anything done. One of the guards let out another quiet laugh. This time Dara heard it and did not silence it. Instead, she walked on. And as she did, her hand moved, just slightly, toward the edge of her own armor, as if, for the briefest moment, she were aware of what lay beneath it in a way she had not been before. The corridor widened without warning, opening into a long transit spine that had once been designed for rapid movement between sectors. Now it felt abandoned, its systems running on fragments of intention rather than full control. Transparent panels lined one side, revealing the vastness beyond the station. Stars scattered in silent indifference, a distant nebula bleeding soft color into the void. For a moment, everything seemed still. Then the floor shifted, not violently this time, but steadily. Gravity recalibrating in uneven pulses that rolled through the corridor like slow waves. The human adjusted his stance instinctively, knees bending just enough to absorb the motion. Ah, he said, we've entered the creative physics section. Dara's guards tightened their footing, their armor compensating with low hums of stabilization. Dara herself stood unmoved, though her eyes tracked the subtle distortions in the air, where gravity fields overlapped imperfectly. This is deliberate? She asked. Not unless the station's developed a sense of humor, he replied, and if it has, I'd like to file a complaint. Another wave passed. A loose piece of debris, a small panel fragment, lifted briefly from the floor, hovered, then drifted sideways before settling again. The human watched it go. See? Artistic choices. They moved forward carefully, their steps timed between the pulses. The corridor stretched far ahead, its length uninterrupted but uncertain. Halfway through, a sharp tone cut through the air. Not an alarm, something more focused. The human froze. That, he said quietly, is not good. Dara's gaze sharpened. Explain. He lifted his scanner, adjusting its settings rapidly. The device responded with a rapid series of pulses, then emitted a steady rising tone. Security system, he said. Automated. Probably switched to autonomous mode when everything started failing. One of the guards raised his weapon. Then we disable it. Wouldn't recommend that, the human said. This place likes to escalate. As if on cue, a section of the corridor ahead shifted. Panels along the wall slid open with mechanical precision, revealing recessed emitters that began to glow with a faint, focused light. Dara stepped forward slightly. A defensive measure. Yeah, he said. Against everything. The emitters brightened. Then, without further warning, beams of concentrated energy lanced across the corridor. Thin, precise lines that moved in calculated patterns, scanning, adjusting, closing off space. One beam passed close enough to the human's shoulder to leave a faint scorch on the outer layer of his armor. He stepped back quickly. Right. Definitely against everything. Dara's guards shifted into defensive positions, their armor flaring with energy shields. The beams struck one of the shields, dispersing into a cascade of light that rippled outward. "Temporary," the guard said. "They will adapt." "They always do," the human replied. He studied the pattern, eyes tracking the movement of the beams as they intersected and shifted. The rhythm was not random. It adjusted, learning, predicting. "Stay where you are," he said. Dara did not move. Her gaze followed his, analyzing the system with equal intensity. The beams created a shifting lattice, closing and opening pathways in rapid succession. "You are calculating a route," she said. "Trying to," he replied. "It's like a very aggressive puzzle." Another beam cut across the space, closer this time. The heat from it lingered in the air. "Any mistakes?" one of the guards asked. The human gave a small, humorless smile. "Let's not find out." He took a step forward, not into the beams, but toward them, testing the timing. One beam passed, another followed, a third intersected. He moved, quick, precise, slipping through the narrow gap as the pattern shifted. His movement was not elegant, but it was exact, his body adjusting mid-step to avoid contact. He reached a point halfway through, then stopped, turning back. "Okay," he said, "it's possible." "That is not reassuring," Dara replied. "It's the best I've got." He watched the pattern again, then gestured. "When I say go, you follow my steps." "Exactly." Dara's ears angled forward. "I do not trust me," he said. The words were simple, unadorned. For a moment the corridor seemed to pause. Then Dara nodded once. The human turned back to the beams. "All right," he said under his breath. "Let's dance." He stepped again, moving through the shifting pattern with careful precision. "Now," he said. Dara moved. Her motion was flawless, controlled, measured, adapting instantly to the pattern he had mapped. A beam passed within a fraction of distance from her arm, close enough to distort the air around it. She did not hesitate. Behind her, her guards followed, less fluid but equally determined. One of them clipped the edge of a beam, his shield flaring brightly as it absorbed the impact. "I said exactly," the human called back. "I am aware," the guard replied through clenched teeth. They reached the midpoint. The pattern shifted. Faster now. The system had adjusted. "Of course it did," the human muttered. He recalculated quickly, his movements tightening as the gaps narrowed. "New plan," he said. "Same idea, slightly less forgiving." "That is not an improvement," Dara said. "Working on it." Another step, another shift. A beam cut across his path unexpectedly. He twisted sharply, the edge of it grazing his side. The smell of heated material filled the air. He exhaled once. "Still here," he said. Dara's gaze flicked to him, then back to the pattern. "Focus," he added. She did. Step by step, they moved through the lattice, the space around them alive with motion and light. The beams grew faster, more precise, narrowing their margins with each pass. Then suddenly, they were through. The beams continued behind them, still active, still searching, but no longer blocking their path. The human exhaled slowly, lowering his scanner. "See?" he said. "Just a puzzle." One of the guards let out a short breath. "A lethal puzzle." "Those are the only interesting kind," he replied. Dara stood still for a moment, her posture unchanged, but her attention lingering on the space they had crossed. "You navigate danger as if it is routine," she said. He shrugged slightly. "It usually is." "And the risk?" He glanced back at the beams, then forward again. "Part of the job," he said. "You get used to it." Dara's gaze remained on him. "And if you fail?" He gave a small, quiet smile. "Then I won't have to worry about it anymore." There was a brief silence. Then, unexpectedly, one of the guards spoke. "I dislike your logic." "Most people do," the human said. "It's very inconvenient." Dara turned, and for the first time, there was something in her expression that had not been there before. Not confusion, not analysis, but the faintest trace of something else. Not agreement, but understanding beginning to form. "Continue," she said, and he did. The corridor beyond the security lattice was quieter, but not safer. The hum of the station had changed again, lower and uneven, like a machine running on memory instead of power. Sections of the wall flickered in and out of existence, not disappearing entirely, but phasing just enough to reveal the structural grid beneath, as if reality itself had loosened its grip on the station's shape. The human slowed. "That's new," he said. Dara studied the flickering surfaces. "A failure in matter stabilization?" "Either that," he replied, "or the station's trying a new design approach." One of the guards reached out, then stopped just short of touching a panel that shimmered faintly. "If it phases completely, you fall through," the human said. "Or you don't. Depends how lucky you feel." "I do not feel lucky," the guard answered. "Good, Lameur," he said. "Stay that way." They moved forward carefully, stepping only on sections that appeared stable. The human tested each segment with the edge of his boot before committing weight, his movements slower now, more deliberate. Dara followed closely. Her gaze was no longer fixed on the environment alone. It returned again and again to him, to the way he moved, the way he adjusted without thought, the way his body carried its history without ever acknowledging it. "You compensate constantly," she said. He glanced back briefly. "For what?" "Everything," she replied. He considered that, then nodded once. "Yeah," he said. "Probably." "Does it not tire you?" He stepped onto a stable section, then turned slightly. "It's just how I move," he said. "You don't notice it after a while." "That is not an answer. It's the only one I've got." A section of the floor ahead flickered sharply, then vanished for a fraction of a second before reappearing. The human stopped, adjusting his path. "Give it a second," he said. "It's deciding whether it wants to exist." The panel stabilized. He stepped forward. Dara followed, her movements precise, though slower now, not from uncertainty, but from thought. "You said you do not carry your past," she said. "I said I don't carry it the same way," he corrected. "You move as if you do," she said. He paused. That stopped him more than the shifting floor had. For a moment he didn't respond. Dara stepped closer, her presence quiet but insistent. "Your body remembers," she continued. "It adapts, it anticipates. That is not absence. That is integration." The words settled between them. He looked down briefly, as if considering something he had never needed to examine. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "That sounds about right." "Then you do carry it," she said. "Just not like you think," he replied. The corridor flickered again, a ripple of instability passing through the walls. Dara did not look away from him. "In my people," she said, "such integration would be marked, displayed. It would be a symbol of resilience." He gave a small, thoughtful exhale. "We usually just call it getting by." "That is insufficient recognition." "It's efficient," he said. She tilted her head slightly, studying him with renewed intensity. "You diminish it. I simplify it. There is a difference." "Not always." Another flicker, stronger this time. A section of the wall to their right phased out completely, revealing open space beyond the station. Stars burned in the distance, cold and indifferent. The edge of the opening shimmered, unstable. One of the guards stepped back instinctively. "That is not contained." "Yeah," the human said. "Let's not lean on that." The wall phased back in, sealing the void as if nothing had happened. The silence that followed was heavier. Dara's voice, when it came again, was quieter. "You said you do not need acknowledgement," she said. He nodded. "I don't." "Then why does your body remember so precisely?" He hesitated, not because he lacked an answer, but because the question had not existed before. "It's not about remembering," he said slowly. "It's about not repeating the same mistakes." "That is still memory." "Yeah," he admitted. "Just practical memory." Dara stepped closer again, close enough now that the distance between them felt intentional rather than incidental. "And the pain?" she asked. He looked at her. There was no humor in his expression now, no deflection. "It happened," he said. "That is not an answer. It's the only one that matters." She held his gaze. "In my world," she said, "pain shapes identity. It is acknowledged, reinforced, given meaning." He nodded slightly. "I figured." "And without that," she continued, "how do you know what you have endured?" He gave a small, quiet smile. Not dismissive, not amused. Something softer. "I don't need to prove it," he said. The words landed differently than the others. Dara's posture shifted. Barely, but enough. "To whom?" she asked. "To anyone," he said, "including myself." The corridor hummed faintly, as if reacting to the exchange. Dara's hand moved, again almost unconsciously, toward the edge of her armor. This time it lingered there. "You do not prove your strength," she said. "I use it," he replied. Another flicker passed through the corridor, but neither of them reacted immediately. For a moment the instability of the station felt distant, secondary to something else that had taken shape between them. "You are unusual," Dara said. He exhaled once, a quiet sound that might have been a laugh. "I get that a lot," he said. It was not intended as humor. "It never is." One of the guards cleared his throat slightly. "Your Majesty, we should—" The floor shifted. Not a flicker, not a phase, a full drop. The section beneath them vanished for a split second, gravity failing completely before snapping back into place. The human reacted instantly, grabbing Dara's arm and pulling her forward onto a stable section as the space behind them destabilized. The guards followed, their movements sharp and controlled. The floor returned, but the message was clear. Time was running out. The human released her arm, stepping back just enough to restore distance. "Okay," he said. "Less talking, more moving." Dara did not move immediately. Her gaze remained on him, steady, searching. Then slowly, she nodded. "Continue," she said. And this time, when she followed, it was not just to escape the station. The corridor ended in light. Not the controlled illumination of a functioning station, but something broader. White, diffused, spilling through a wide opening where a reinforced bulkhead had partially retracted. Beyond it, the evacuation bay stretched outward. Its massive doors opened to the black, held in place by a shimmering containment field that hummed with strained precision. Ships hovered beyond the threshold. Sleek diplomatic vessels, heavier military craft, all aligned in urgent formation. Beams of guided light cut through the void, marking approach vectors, stabilizing trajectories. For the first time since the alarms began, the station felt connected to something stable. The humans slowed as they reached the edge of the bay, his scanner finally falling silent. "Well," he said, glancing out toward the waiting ships. "Good news. We're not the last ones to figure out leaving was a good idea." Dara stepped forward. The light from the containment field washed over her, soft but absolute, outlining her form against the vastness beyond. Her guards moved into position around her again, their formation tightening, restoring something of the order that had been lost. But not entirely. The human remained just outside that formation, not excluded, not included. Simply there. A transport vessel adjusted its position, aligning with the bay. Its hull bore the markings of Dara's people. Clean, deliberate, unmistakable. "Your extraction," one of the guards said. Dara did not move. Her gaze remained on the space ahead, then shifted, slowly, deliberately, toward the human. For a moment neither spoke. Behind them the station groaned again, a deeper, final sound, as if the structure had reached the limit of its argument with existence. "We should go," the human said. "It's starting to sound committed." Dara's attention lingered on him. "You will not be coming," she said. It was not a question. He shook his head slightly. "Different ride," he said. "I've got a shuttle somewhere that's hopefully still attached to something." "That is an inefficient plan." "It's the only one I've got." There was a pause. Then Dara stepped closer. Not as a queen approaching a subject, as something else. "You have sustained damage that would define many," she said. "Yet you do not allow it to." He exhaled softly. "We've been over this," he said. "I'm not that interesting." "You are," she said. The certainty in her voice stilled him. For a moment the noise of the station, the movement of the ships, the urgency of departure, all of it seemed to recede. Dara's hand moved again, this time not stopping at the edge of her armor. She disengaged a segment. The motion was precise, controlled. The outer layer shifted, opening just enough to reveal what lay beneath. Not fully, but enough. The skin beneath bore marks, clean, deliberate, each one preserved with intention. Lines that followed patterns, that told stories in a language of survival and recognition. For the first time, she did not present them. She simply revealed them. The human looked, his expression changing, not to surprise, not to judgment, just understanding. "These define me," she said, "or so I believed." He nodded once. "And now?" She paused. The answer did not come immediately. Behind them, a section of the corridor collapsed with a sharp final crack, the sound echoing through the bay. The containment field flickered, then stabilized again. Time was no longer patient. Dara looked at him. "They are part of me," she said, "but they are not all of me." The words settled into the space between them, quiet but absolute. The human smiled, small, genuine. "That sounds about right." She studied him for a moment longer, then sealed the armor again. The segment locked back into place with a soft, final sound. "You do not carry your past as I do," she said. "No," he replied, "but you do not discard it either." "Wouldn't know how," he said. "It keeps showing up." A faint, unexpected sound escaped her. Short, quiet, almost a laugh. One of her guards shifted slightly, clearly uncertain how to process that. Dara straightened. The weight of her presence returned. But it was different now. Not diminished, not softened. Changed. "Human," she said. "Marin," he corrected. She inclined her head slightly. "Marin," she repeated. A small acknowledgement. Nothing more. Everything more. "You have given me a different understanding," she said. "It is inefficient." He grinned faintly. "Yeah," he said. "That happens." Another vibration passed through the station, stronger this time. The containment field flickered again, the edges of it distorting briefly. "Definitely time to go," he added. Dara turned toward the waiting vessel. Her guards moved with her, their formation reassembling fully now, precise and controlled. She reached the threshold, stopped, and looked back. Marin was already stepping away, turning toward a side passage that led deeper into the bay, toward whatever remained of his own exit. "Try to avoid collapsing stations in the future," he said without turning. "They're bad for your schedule." There was a brief pause, then, quietly, "I will consider it," she said. He gave a small wave over his shoulder. "That's all I ask." She watched him for a moment longer. Then she stepped forward, crossing the containment field and boarding the vessel. Inside, the environment shifted instantly. Stable gravity, controlled light, the quiet efficiency of a functioning system. Attendants moved to meet her, voices low, precise. "Your Majesty, are you?" "I am intact," she said. The words were automatic, but not entirely the same. She moved deeper into the vessel, the doors sealing behind her with a final resonant tone. Through the viewing panel, the station remained visible, fractured, failing, but still holding together just long enough. For now. Dara stood in silence. Her hand moved once more, resting briefly against her armor, not to display, not to conceal, just to feel. Outside, the ships began to move, pulling away from the station in coordinated arcs. The containment field collapsed as the last vessel cleared the bay, the light fading into the dark. The station lingered for a moment longer. Then it broke. Not violently, not dramatically. It simply came apart, its structure dissolving into fragments that drifted outward, silent and unceremonious. Dara watched, not as a queen observing loss, as something else, something that had shifted. Behind her, the crew spoke in low tone, systems recalibrating, courses adjusting. Life continued as it always did. She turned away from the viewport. "Set course," she said. "Yes, Your Majesty." The vessel responded, engines engaging with a smooth, controlled surge. Dara closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. And for the first time, the weight she carried felt different, not gone, not diminished, just no longer everything. Far beyond the vessel, in a different corridor, a human found his way to a battered shuttle, glanced at its flickering control panel, and sighed. "Still here," he muttered. The shuttle sparked in response. "Yeah," he added, "I missed you too." And with that, he climbed in. the hatch sealing behind him as the last pieces of the station drifted into the quiet.